I stood in the HR office, staring at Brandon Whitmore across his massive desk. 3 weeks. That was how long the CEO's new son-in-law had been running human resources before he decided my career was over. His smirk made my stomach turn as he slid a cardboard box toward me. "Turn in your badge," he said. "We're cutting dead weight." 8 years I had been the authorized security liaison at Sentinel Defense Solutions. 8 years managing classified government contracts, building relationships with Pentagon officials, creating security protocols from nothing. But Brandon didn't care about any of that. I was just a number on his cost-cutting spreadsheet. I handed over my badge without saying a word. The first week after getting fired felt like living in a fog. I kept waking up at 6 in the morning out of habit, reaching for my work phone before remembering I didn't have one anymore. My apartment in Arlington suddenly felt too big and too quiet. I had built my entire adult life around Sentinel Defense Solutions, starting as a junior compliance officer right out of college and working my way up through sheer determination and countless late nights studying defense acquisition regulations. I was the only person in the company who held top-secret SCI clearance and maintained direct relationships with 5 different Defense Contract Management Agency officials. Every quarter, I updated our security protocols to match new federal requirements. Every audit, I was the one who walked the inspectors through our classified materials handling procedures. Every Pentagon procurement officer who worked with Sentinel knew my name and trusted me personally. And Brandon had thrown it all away because he looked at a spreadsheet and decided my salary was too high. I started sending out resumes immediately. My qualifications were solid. I had certifications in NISPOM compliance, ITAR regulations, and defense contract security. 6 months ago, recruiters from other defense contractors had been calling me weekly, trying to poach me from Sentinel. I figured finding a new position would take 2 weeks, maybe 3. But something was wrong. Companies that had been aggressively headhunting me suddenly went silent. I applied to 11 different security liaison positions at major defense contractors. I got 2 phone interviews, and both ended abruptly when they asked about my departure from Sentinel. One recruiter I had known for 3 years finally called me back and asked to meet for coffee off the record. She looked uncomfortable the entire time. "Cherry," she said quietly, "there are questions about why you left. Your former employer isn't giving you a good reference." She wouldn't elaborate, but I understood. Brandon had put something damaging in my personnel file. He was poisoning my reputation across the entire industry. 2 weeks after my firing, I was sitting in my living room applying for my 19th job when my phone rang. It was Marcus Chen, a junior engineer I had worked with at Sentinel. His voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand him at first. "Cherry, we need you to come back," he said. "Just for a few days. As a contractor. We'll pay whatever you want." I was confused. Come back for what? The audit. The DoD sent an audit notice for the Aegis contract. They need the authorized security liaison present. Brandon said he would handle it, but Marcus paused. "Cherry, he doesn't have clearance. He doesn't have training. He doesn't even understand what DCAA stands for." The Aegis contract was worth $200 million annually. It was Sentinel's largest government relationship, covering advanced radar systems for naval vessels. The Defense Contract Audit Agency conducted regular compliance reviews, and those reviews were not optional. An authorized security liaison with proper clearance had to be present to discuss classified protocols and material handling procedures. I felt a cold satisfaction wash over me. This was Brandon's mess now. Why would I help the company that humiliated me? "I'm not interested," I told Marcus. Brandon made his decision. He can live with the consequences. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I understand. I'm sorry about what happened to you. It wasn't right." He hung up. I went back to my job applications, trying to ignore the small voice in my head reminding me that good people still worked at Sentinel. Engineers like Marcus who had nothing to do with my firing. Administrative staff who were just trying to do their jobs. But I pushed those thoughts away. I had to look out for myself now. That evening, Marcus called again. This time he wasn't asking. He was warning me. "Cherry, the auditor showed up today. It was a surprise inspection. They do that sometimes when they suspect problems." Brandon tried to handle it. The auditor asked him about classified material storage protocols, and Brandon started talking about the cloud backup system. I closed my eyes. Oh no. The auditor asked if classified materials were being stored in commercial cloud systems. Brandon said yes. We had everything backed up to Amazon Web Services for disaster recovery. Cherry. The auditor's face went completely white. Classified materials cannot be stored in commercial cloud systems. Ever. It was one of the most basic rules in defense contracting, literally covered on page 1 of the NISPOM handbook. Brandon's answer was a catastrophic security violation, and he had said it directly to a federal auditor. What happened? I asked, even though I already knew. The auditor suspended our security certification immediately, pending investigation. We have 30 days to demonstrate compliance or we lose everything. All 12 government contracts. Cherry, that's $500 million in annual revenue. The company will collapse. I sat there holding my phone, feeling numb. Part of me felt vindicated. Brandon had been so confident, so dismissive, so certain that my job was expendable. Now he was learning exactly why my position had existed in the first place. But another part of me felt sick. Sentinel employed 340 people. Most of them had families, mortgages, car payments. If the company collapsed because Brandon was an arrogant fool, all those people would suffer. But it wasn't my problem anymore. I had my own survival to worry about. 5 days after Marcus's call, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. The caller ID showed a number I recognized immediately. Gerald Whitmore, the CEO himself. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Cherry. His voice was smooth and apologetic. I owe you an enormous apology. I had no idea Brandon terminated you. He told me you had resigned to pursue other opportunities. When I found out the truth yesterday, I was appalled. I said nothing, waiting to see where this was going. I want to offer you your position back, Gerald continued. Full reinstatement with a 40% salary increase, $185,000 annually. You'll report directly to me, not to HR. Brandon will have no authority over your work whatsoever. I'm also prepared to issue a formal written apology and correct your personnel file immediately. A 40% raise would put me at a salary I had never dreamed of reaching this early in my career. It would solve all my financial worries. More importantly, it would restore my reputation. I could tell future employers that the situation had been resolved, that I was valuable enough for the CEO to personally recruit me back. But I was skeptical. Why now? Why after letting Brandon destroy my career? Gerald's voice became more urgent. Cherry, I'll be honest with you. We're in serious trouble. The DoD has suspended our security certification. We have 23 days left to fix this situation, or we lose every government contract we hold. I need someone who knows our systems, who has relationships with the auditors, who can guide us through the remediation process. You built our entire security infrastructure. You're the only person who can save this company. There it was, the truth. He didn't care about apologizing. He cared about saving his business. But I needed income. My savings account had less than $4,000 left. I had maxed out 2 credit cards just covering basic living expenses. No other company would hire me with the cloud of suspicion hanging over my departure. What about Brandon? I asked. He'll stay out of your way completely. You have my word. I accepted the offer because I didn't have a choice. We agreed I would start in 3 days, on Monday morning. When Monday came, I arrived at Sentinel's office building in Crystal City at 8 in the morning. I walked up to the security desk and handed the guard my driver's license for a temporary badge. He scanned it, frowned at his computer, and made a phone call. 20 minutes later, I was still standing in the lobby. Other employees walked past, some nodding at me with sympathetic looks, others avoiding eye contact entirely. Finally, a temporary badge was printed, and I took the elevator to the 4th floor. The entire commute up, I prepared myself for the awkwardness of returning to a place that had rejected me. But when I reached what used to be my office, I found it had been converted into a supply storage room. File boxes were stacked where my desk had been. My diplomas and certifications that had hung on the wall were gone. A facilities manager I barely knew walked past and told me my new workspace was in Cube Farm B, Section 3. I followed his directions to the back corner of the building, as far from the executive offices as physically possible while still being on the same floor. My cubicle was next to the bathroom and across from the vending machines. Every time someone walked by, the walls shook. I had barely set down my bag when Gerald's assistant called. He wanted to see me in the executive conference room immediately. I walked down the long hallway to the corner office suite. The conference room was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Potomac River. Gerald sat at the head of the table. Brandon was there too, arms crossed and scowling. And there was a woman I had never seen before, probably in her mid-30s, wearing an expensive suit and an expression of bored superiority. "Cherry," Gerald said with forced cheerfulness, "thank you for coming back. I want you to meet Stephanie Hartley. She's our new security liaison." I felt my stomach drop. New security liaison? I thought I was being rehired as the security liaison. "Stephanie has excellent credentials," Gerald continued, not meeting my eyes. "She previously worked at Northbridge Systems, managing their export compliance program. She has secret clearance and is working on getting her top-secret upgrade. However, she's not familiar with our specific protocols and procedures. That's where you come in." I looked at Brandon. He was smirking again. "We'd like you to spend the next 3 weeks training Stephanie," Gerald said. "Help her understand our security architecture, introduce her to the government liaisons, prepare her for the audit. Once the DoD restores our certification, you'll transition into a consultant role helping us optimize our compliance systems going forward." I understood immediately. This was never a real job offer. They needed my knowledge to pass the audit, but they had no intention of keeping me permanently. Gerald wanted Stephanie as the security liaison because she would be cheaper, and because Brandon had probably already poisoned Gerald's opinion of me. I was being hired as a 3-week contractor to train my own replacement. The consultant role was fiction. Once they had what they needed, I would be gone again, and I had already turned down 2 job interviews to accept this position. I should have walked out right then, but I had $900 in my checking account and rent due in 2 weeks. I needed every penny they would pay me, even if it meant swallowing my pride and helping the people who had betrayed me. "What's the pay rate?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Gerald looked uncomfortable. "We're offering a contractor rate of $125 per hour, guaranteed 40 hours per week for 3 weeks. That's $15,000 total." It was a fraction of what he had promised on the phone, but it was better than nothing. "Fine," I said. "When do we start?" We spent the rest of that morning in the conference room. I began explaining Sentinel's security structure to Stephanie, starting with the basics of NISPOM requirements and the hierarchy of classified information levels. She took notes on an iPad but kept interrupting with questions that showed she didn't understand fundamental concepts. "What's the difference between secret and top secret?" she asked at one point. I explained that top-secret information could cause exceptionally grave damage to national security if disclosed, while secret information would cause serious damage. The classification levels determined who could access the information and how it had to be stored and transmitted. "But why can't we just keep everything encrypted on a regular server?" Stephanie asked. "Encryption is encryption." Brandon nodded as if this was a brilliant observation. "That's what I've been saying." I spent 10 minutes explaining why classified materials required physical security measures, air-gapped networks, and specific handling protocols that commercial encryption couldn't satisfy. Stephanie looked annoyed, as if I was overcomplicating things deliberately. This is going to be a long 3 weeks, I thought. On Friday of that first week, Colonel Patricia Reeves arrived for a preliminary security assessment. Patricia and I had worked together for 6 years. She was a no-nonsense Air Force officer who served as the DoD liaison for all of Sentinel's naval contracts. She had always been fair but exacting in her standards. I met her in the lobby and brought her upstairs. Gerald had assembled everyone in the main conference room. Brandon stood at the head of the table like he was running the meeting. Stephanie sat next to him, looking confident. "Colonel Reeves," Brandon said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for coming. I'm Brandon Whitmore, head of Human Resources. This is Stephanie Hartley, our security liaison. We're ready to walk you through our compliance remediation plan." Patricia's eyes scanned the room and landed on me standing in the back corner. Her expression shifted to confusion. "Where's Cherry Walker?" she asked. Brandon's smile faltered slightly. Miss Walker is no longer with the company in an official capacity. She's here as a temporary consultant to assist with the transition. Patricia's face hardened. She set down her briefcase very deliberately. Mr. Whitmore, let me make something clear. Cherry Walker has been the authorized security liaison for Sentinel Defense Solutions since 2017. Every security protocol, every audit, every classified materials review has been conducted under her authority. She holds TS divided by SCI clearance and has personal relationships with every DCMA officer assigned to your contracts. She knows your systems better than anyone else in this company. And you fired her? Brandon's face flushed. We made a strategic decision to restructure our compliance department. You made a catastrophically stupid decision, Patricia said coldly. She pulled out a tablet and typed something quickly. Then she turned to Gerald. Mr. Whitmore, I'm formally notifying you that all 12 of Sentinel Defense Solutions government contracts are now under enhanced security review. The Department of Defense is freezing $500 million in contract payments pending verification of security compliance. You have 21 days to demonstrate that you have adequate safeguards in place for classified materials. If you cannot demonstrate compliance, all contracts will be terminated and your facility clearance will be permanently revoked. The room went completely silent. Gerald's face had gone pale. Brandon looked like he might be sick. Patricia turned to me. Cherry, can I speak with you privately? We stepped into an empty office down the hall. Patricia closed the door and looked at me with something between sympathy and frustration. What happened? I told her everything. The firing without warning. The blacklisting across the industry. The fake job offer to train my replacement. Patricia listened without interrupting, her jaw getting tighter with each detail. When I finished, she shook her head. This company is going to collapse. You know that, right? Brandon violated about 15 different regulations just in the conversation I overheard. Stephanie isn't qualified for this position, and Gerald clearly has no idea what's happening in his own company. I know, I said quietly. Why did you come back? Because nobody else will hire me right now. Because I need the money. Because I didn't have a choice. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised me. Document everything. Every conversation, every email, every instruction they give you. If this goes sideways, and it will, you're going to need evidence that you tried to fix their mess and they wouldn't listen. Why are you telling me this? Because in 6 years of working with defense contractors, you're one of maybe 3 people I've met who actually cares about doing things right instead of just checking boxes. You don't deserve whatever's about to happen here. She left a few minutes later. I went back to my cubicle and started writing down everything that had happened in the past month. I didn't know why I would need it, but Patricia's warning had been clear. Something worse was coming. The subpoena arrived on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks into my temporary contract with Sentinel. A process server came to my apartment at 7 in the morning and handed me an official document from the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. I was being required to testify under oath about my role as security liaison at Sentinel Defense Solutions and the circumstances surrounding my termination. The subpoena requested all personal records, emails, communications, and documents related to my employment. The testimony was scheduled for 12 days from now at the Inspector General's offices in Washington. My hands were shaking as I read through the legal language. This wasn't just an inquiry anymore. This was a formal investigation. The federal government was examining whether Sentinel had committed security violations, and I was a material witness. An hour later, I got a call from Gerald's executive assistant. Mr. Whitmore would like to meet with you this afternoon to discuss your upcoming testimony. Sentinel's legal team will be present to help you prepare. I should have known something was wrong from the phrasing. Help you prepare. But I was naive enough to think maybe they actually wanted to assist me in telling the truth. I arrived at Sentinel's offices at 2 in the afternoon and was directed to a conference room I had never been in before. It was in the basement level, with no windows and soundproofed walls. 3 people in expensive suits were sitting at the table. Brandon and Gerald sat against the wall, not at the table itself. The power dynamic was clear. The lawyers were in charge now. The lead attorney introduced himself as Douglas Hunt from the firm of Morrison, Hunt and Associates. He was probably 60 years old, with silver hair and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from winning many battles in court. The other two lawyers were younger associates who said nothing and took notes constantly. "Miss Walker," Douglas began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Thank you for coming. We understand you've been subpoenaed by the DoD Inspector General. We want to make sure your testimony is accurate and doesn't inadvertently harm the company or create legal exposure for anyone involved." He slid a document across the table toward me. "This is a sworn statement we've prepared based on your personnel file and discussions with management. We'd like you to review it before your testimony to ensure your recollection aligns with the documented facts." I picked up the document and started reading. By the second paragraph, my stomach was churning. By the fourth paragraph, I felt physically ill. The statement claimed I had been terminated for performance deficiencies and repeated security protocol violations. It said I had failed 3 internal audits in 2024. It alleged that I was resistant to necessary oversight improvements and had conflicts with multiple supervisors. It stated that my departure was voluntary after being offered a performance improvement plan. Every single word was a lie. I had never failed an audit. I had never had conflicts with supervisors. I hadn't been offered a performance improvement plan. Brandon had called me into his office and fired me on the spot, calling me dead weight. This document was complete fiction designed to make my termination look justified and shift blame for Sentinel's security problems onto me. "This isn't what happened," I said, pushing the paper back across the table. Douglas's expression didn't change. "Miss Walker, these are the documented facts as recorded in your personnel file by Human Resources. We understand memory can be unreliable, especially during stressful situations. This statement will help ensure your testimony is consistent with company records." "I'm not signing this. It's not true." One of the younger associates leaned forward. "Miss Walker, you should understand that if your testimony contradicts documented company records, it could raise questions about your credibility. The Inspector General's office takes false statements very seriously." "Are you threatening me?" Douglas held up a hand. "Nobody is threatening anyone. We're simply ensuring you understand the situation. Sentinel Defense Solutions has cooperated fully with the DoD investigation. We've provided all requested documents and records. If your testimony introduces contradictory information, particularly information that could be construed as retaliatory, it could create legal complications for you personally." The implication was clear. If I testified to the truth about my firing, they would claim I was lying to get revenge on the company. They would use their fabricated personnel records to paint me as a disgruntled former employee with credibility problems, and they had expensive lawyers while I had nothing. "I need to think about this," I said, standing up. Douglas stood as well. "Of course, take your time, but understand that the company is prepared to vigorously defend itself against any false allegations. We have documentation of your performance issues. We have witness statements. We have everything we need to demonstrate that your termination was legitimate and appropriate." I left the building feeling like I couldn't breathe. They weren't just trying to cover up their mistakes. They were actively trying to frame me as the cause of Sentinel's security problems. If I testified truthfully, they would destroy whatever remained of my reputation. If I testified falsely, I would be committing perjury in a federal investigation. The next morning, things got worse. Much worse. I was at home drinking coffee and trying to figure out what to do when someone knocked loudly on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 people in dark suits holding badges. Federal agents. I opened the door with shaking hands. The woman showed me her credentials. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh from the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. Her partner was Special Agent Robert Kim. They asked if they could come inside to ask me some questions. I let them in because I didn't know what else to do. They sat in my living room and Agent Walsh pulled out a folder. "Miss Walker, we're investigating a complaint that was filed yesterday by Sentinel Defense Solutions. They allege that you removed classified materials from their facility when you were terminated and may have compromised national security. Do you have any classified documents, files, or digital media in your possession?" I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. No, absolutely not. I followed every protocol when I left. I didn't take anything. Agent Kim looked around my apartment with professional detachment. "We're going to need to verify that. Do you consent to a search of your residence? Or do we need to obtain a warrant? What was I supposed to say? If I refused, it would look like I had something to hide. If I agreed, they would tear apart my home looking for evidence of a crime I didn't commit. You can search, I said quietly. I don't have anything classified here. They spent 3 hours going through every drawer, every closet, every box in my apartment. They took my laptop, my phone, my tablet, and 2 boxes of papers from my file cabinet. They were professional and polite, but my neighbors watched through windows as federal agents carried boxes out of my apartment. My landlord called me that evening asking if everything was okay and if I was involved in anything illegal. The agents found nothing, because there was nothing to find. But the damage was done. Now I had an active federal investigation on my record. A formal complaint had been filed alleging I had mishandled classified information. Even if I was completely cleared, that allegation would show up on background checks for the rest of my career. Brandon had filed a false report with federal law enforcement to intimidate me before my testimony. And it was working. I was terrified. Over the next week, things spiraled further. I got my laptop back with a letter stating no classified materials had been found, but the investigation would remain open pending the outcome of the Inspector General's inquiry. In the meantime, I couldn't work in any position requiring security clearance. My clearances weren't revoked, but they were effectively frozen. I stopped going to Sentinel's office. There was no point. Stephanie had barely learned anything and didn't seem interested in learning more. The company's legal team sent me daily emails reminding me that I was still bound by confidentiality agreements and non-disparagement clauses. Douglas Hunt called me 3 more times offering variations of the same deal. Sign their false statement, testify that my firing was legitimate, agree to a non-disclosure agreement, and they would pay me $50,000 and make the security investigation disappear. Each time I refused, the offer got slightly larger. By the end of the week, they were offering $75,000. I almost took it. I was running out of money. I had no job prospects. My reputation was destroyed. Accepting their deal would at least give me enough money to survive for a while, and maybe start over somewhere far away from the defense industry. But every time I picked up the phone to call Douglas back, I thought about Patricia's advice. Document everything. I thought about all the good people at Sentinel who would lose their jobs if the company collapsed due to criminal leadership. I thought about the classified information that Brandon might compromise through sheer incompetence, potentially endangering military personnel. I couldn't do it. I couldn't help them cover up what they had done. My testimony was in 4 days, and I had no idea what I was going to say. The real breaking point came on a Friday evening, 3 days before my scheduled testimony. I was sitting in my apartment eating takeout Chinese food, because I couldn't afford to go out to eat anymore when Tyler came home from work. We had been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months, planning a wedding for next summer. He worked in commercial real estate development and made good money. His income had been helping cover our expenses since I lost my job. He came through the door looking upset. He didn't kiss me hello or ask about my day. He just went straight to the bedroom and started pulling clothes out of the closet. "What are you doing?" I asked, following him. He didn't look at me. My boss pulled me aside today, asked me about the federal investigation involving my fiancé. Apparently, someone from Sentinel Defense Solutions called our office asking for a reference check on you. They mentioned the security investigation. They told my boss you were under investigation for mishandling classified materials. Tyler, that's not true. They're lying to discredit me before I testify. He finally looked at me, and his expression was cold. Are they? Because from where I'm standing, you lost your job, you're being investigated by federal agents, you're being subpoenaed to testify in a government case, and somehow this is all just a big misunderstanding? Yes, that's exactly what it is. I was fired unjustly and now they're trying to silence me. Tyler shook his head. You know what I think? I think you screwed something up at work, got caught, and now you're trying to play the victim. Normal people don't get investigated by federal agents, Cherry. Normal people don't have their employers file complaints about national security violations. I felt like Hay had slapped May. You don't believe May? I believe that my career is now at risk because of your problems. My boss asked if we were still together. He suggested that maybe I should distance myself from this situation professionally. Do you understand what that means? He's questioning whether I'm a liability because of you. So, this is about your career. Not about whether I'm telling the truth. Not about whether you believe in me or trust me. Tyler was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled off his engagement ring and set it on the dresser. I can't marry someone who's under federal investigation. I can't tie my life to someone who's going to be unemployable and possibly facing criminal charges. I'm sorry, but I have to protect myself. He packed 2 suitcases and left that night. 4 years together, and he abandoned me the moment things got difficult. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, staring at the engagement ring on the dresser, and realized I had never really known him at all. The weekend was a blur of phone calls and desperate attempts to hold my life together. Without Tyler's income, I couldn't afford the apartment. I had $3,000 in my bank account after buying the Chinese food. Rent was $2,050 per month. I had already maxed out my credit cards. I called my landlord and explained I needed to break my lease early. He was sympathetic but said I would still owe 2 months' rent as a penalty. $4,100 I didn't have. I spent Saturday packing. I didn't know where I was going. Maybe I could find a room to rent somewhere cheaper. Maybe I could move back to Ohio and stay with my mother until I figured things out. The thought of leaving Washington felt like admitting defeat, but I was out of options. On Sunday, I reached out to everyone I could think of in the defense contracting industry. Former colleagues, contacts from conferences, people I had worked with on joint projects. I sent 37 emails and made 19 phone calls. I was looking for any kind of support, a job lead, a reference, a lawyer recommendation, anything. Only 3 people responded. 2 sent brief emails saying they couldn't help. The third was a woman named Patricia Morrison, who I had mentored when she was starting out in compliance 5 years ago. She agreed to meet me for coffee Monday morning. Patricia arrived at the coffee shop in Arlington looking uncomfortable. She hugged me quickly, then sat down and spoke in a low voice like she was worried about being overheard. "Cherry, I need to tell you something, and I'm risking my job just by being here. Someone from Sentinel has been calling around to everyone in the DCMA community. They're spreading stories about you. They're saying you falsified audit reports, took bribes from foreign defense contractors, and sexually harassed junior employees." I felt my face go numb. "What?" "I know it's not true. I've known you for years. You're one of the most ethical people I've ever worked with. But the rumors are detailed. They're coming from official-sounding sources. They're making people believe them. Who's spreading this?" "I don't know for sure, but the calls are being made by someone claiming to represent Sentinel's HR department. They're telling people it's part of a standard reference check process, but they're clearly trying to destroy your reputation before you testify." Patricia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I can't publicly support you. My company does $30 million a year in business with Sentinel. If I speak up, I'll lose my job too. But I wanted you to know what they're doing. You need to be prepared." "Thank you for telling me," I said, though the words felt hollow. After Patricia left, I sat in the coffee shop for 2 hours, staring at my lukewarm coffee and trying to process everything. Sentinel wasn't just trying to intimidate me or discredit my testimony. They were engaged in a coordinated campaign to systematically destroy every aspect of my life. They had ruined my career prospects, triggered a federal investigation, scared away my fiancé, and now they were spreading vicious lies to everyone who might have helped me. I understood now why Douglas Hunt kept increasing his settlement offer. They needed me to stay silent because I was the only person who could connect all the dots of what had really happened. If I testified truthfully, their whole narrative would collapse. But if they could make me look like a vengeful, incompetent, possibly criminal former employee, nobody would believe anything I said. That evening I sat in my apartment surrounded by half-packed boxes. I had an unopened bottle of wine that Tyler had bought for my birthday. I stared at it for a long time, thinking about how easy it would be to just give up, sign their papers, take their money, move away, start over somewhere else with a new career. I could be a teacher or work in retail, or do anything that didn't require a security clearance. My phone buzzed. Another call from Douglas Hunt. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message saying they were now offering $100,000 to settle everything quietly. $100,000. It was more money than I had ever had in my life. It would solve all my immediate problems. I picked up my phone to call him back. My finger hovered over the screen. Then I saw a new email notification. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, something from a government domain. The subject line said, "Read before you testify." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it instead. The email was short. It said, "You're not the problem. Brandon Whitmore is. The attachments will prove it. Use them to protect yourself." And then a signature, Eagle 6. There were 6 encrypted files attached. The email included a password to decrypt them, the name of the first government contract I had ever managed at Sentinel 8 years ago. Only someone with deep inside knowledge of my career would know that answer. I typed in the password. The files opened. And as I started reading, I realized everything was about to change. The files from Eagle 6 contained 6 months of internal Sentinel communications I had never seen before. Someone with access to the company's email servers had been systematically collecting evidence, and they had just handed me a roadmap to the entire conspiracy. The first file was an email chain between Brandon Whitmore and someone named Victor Petrov. The emails had been automatically archived in Sentinel's backup system but never flagged because they used Brandon's personal Gmail account instead of his company email. Victor's messages came from a Russian telecommunications company. Brandon was selling technical specifications for classified defense systems, naval radar frequencies, missile guidance algorithms, encrypted communication protocols, things that could get American soldiers killed if they fell into the wrong hands. And he had been doing it for 4 months before I was fired. The second file contained bank records. Brandon had set up a shell corporation in Delaware called Whitmore Consulting Group. In the past 6 months, Whitmore Consulting had received wire transfers totaling $730,000 from accounts in Cyprus, Hong Kong, and the Cayman Islands. The money trail was deliberately complicated, but it was clearly payment for the information he was selling. The third file was the smoking gun. 3 months before I was fired, I had filed my routine weekly security report. In that report, I had noted an unusual pattern. Someone was accessing the classified materials room during overnight hours, between 2 and 4 in the morning. The badge access logs showed it was always the same person, but the name was redacted in my report because I was supposed to investigate quietly before making accusations. 2 weeks after I filed that report, Brandon joined Sentinel as the new VP of Human Resources. Gerald had hired his son-in-law without consulting anyone. 1 week after Brandon started, my access to security badge logs was revoked. Brandon told me the system was being upgraded, and I would get new credentials soon. I followed up twice, but he kept stalling. I never got my access back. And 1 month later, I was fired. The fourth file explained why. The person accessing the classified room at night had been using a badge registered to a terminated employee. Someone had kept an old security badge active and was using it to avoid detection. But my security audit would have caught that eventually. I would have traced the badge number, realized it belonged to someone who no longer worked there, and started asking questions about who had physical possession of the badge. Brandon couldn't let that happen, so he got rid of me before I could discover what he was doing. The fifth file contained meeting notes from conversations between Brandon and a lawyer from Morrison, Hunt & Associates. They discussed how to handle my termination to minimize legal exposure. Douglas Hunt had advised Brandon to create documentation showing performance problems and security violations. The lawyer had literally instructed Brandon to fabricate my personnel file to justify the firing. The sixth file was the most damaging. It was an internal Sentinel security assessment from 6 weeks ago, after Brandon took over as acting security liaison. The assessment had been conducted by an outside firm and was marked attorney-client privileged. It detailed dozens of security violations under Brandon's management. Classified materials stored improperly, audit requirements ignored, safety protocols violated. The report concluded that Sentinel was in severe non-compliance and recommended immediate remediation. Gerald had received this report. He knew the company had massive security problems, but instead of fixing them or calling me back, he had filed the report away and hoped the DoD wouldn't notice. When Colonel Reeves showed up and froze the contracts, Gerald had decided the best strategy was to blame everything on me and cover up Brandon's crimes. I spent the entire night reading through the files, cross-referencing documents, and understanding the full scope of what had happened. By sunrise, I had a clear picture. Brandon Whitmore was a spy selling classified information. Douglas Hunt had helped him fabricate evidence to cover his tracks. Gerald Whitmore knew about the security violations and chose to hide them rather than address them, and I had been fired because I was about to accidentally expose the whole operation. The question that kept nagging at me was, who was Eagle 6? Who had access to all these files and why were they helping me? But I didn't have time to figure that out. My testimony was in 12 hours. I printed every page of evidence. I organized it into 3 binders with tabs and annotations. I wrote a detailed timeline of events supported by documents. And then I got dressed, drank 4 cups of coffee, and drove to the Inspector General's office building in downtown Washington. Douglas Hunt was in the waiting area when I arrived. He had 2 other Sentinel lawyers with him. When he saw me carrying 3 heavy binders, his expression changed from confident to worried. "Miss Walker," he said, approaching me quickly, "have you had a chance to reconsider our settlement offer? We're prepared to increase it significantly if we can resolve this today without testimony." I kept walking past him, without responding. A clerk called my name and escorted me into a large conference room with a long table. 4 people sat on one side. The lead investigator introduced himself as Deputy Inspector General Robert Thornton. Next to him was Colonel Patricia Reeves. The other 2 were attorneys from the DoD Office of General Counsel. I was sworn in and the questions began with basic background. How long had I worked at Sentinel? What were my responsibilities? What was my security clearance level? Then they asked about my termination. I explained exactly what happened. Brandon called me into his office, said they were cutting dead weight, and took my badge. No warning, no performance improvement plan, no discussion. Douglas Hunt objected from his seat along the wall, claiming I was presenting a biased narrative. The lead investigator told him to be quiet. Then came the critical question. "Miss Walker, did you ever observe any security violations during your employment at Sentinel Defense Solutions?" I took a deep breath. Yes. Multiple violations, including potential espionage. The room went completely silent. Douglas Hunt's face went white. I opened the first binder and began presenting the evidence from Eagle 6, the emails between Brandon and Victor Petrov, the bank records showing foreign payments, the security audit that Gerald had buried, the fabricated personnel file, the badge access logs. I spoke for 45 minutes without interruption. I presented documentation for every single claim. I walked them through the timeline showing how my firing was directly connected to my security audit that would have exposed Brandon's activities. When I finished, the lead investigator looked at Colonel Reeves. "You've seen this material before." It wasn't a question. Colonel Reeves nodded. "Our office has been investigating Mr. Whitmore separately for 8 weeks. We've been building a case. This testimony confirms our findings and provides additional context we were missing." I stared at her. "You already knew?" "We knew Brandon Whitmore was compromising classified information. We didn't know about the fabricated personnel files or the systematic campaign to discredit you. That's new evidence of obstruction and conspiracy." Douglas Hunt stood up abruptly. "I need to consult with my clients. This testimony is clearly coordinated with the government's investigation and represents a violation of multiple attorney-client privileges." "Mr. Hunt, sit down," the lead investigator said coldly. "Your clients are not the victims here. And you may want to retain personal counsel, because we have evidence you advised Brandon Whitmore on how to fabricate employment records. That's conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation." Douglas Hunt's face went from white to red. He gathered his papers and left the room without another word. The 2 other Sentinel lawyers looked at each other nervously and followed him out. The testimony continued for another hour with more detailed questions. Then the lead investigator thanked me for my cooperation and told me I was free to go. My security investigation would be closed immediately with no adverse findings. In fact, they would be recommending me for a commendation for my cooperation. I walked out of the building in a daze. As I reached the parking lot, I saw federal agents escorting Brandon Whitmore in handcuffs toward an unmarked vehicle. He was screaming about his lawyers and his rights. Gerald Whitmore was standing next to his car, looking like he had aged 10 years. When he saw me, his face crumpled. "I didn't know," he said quietly. I swear I didn't know what Brandon was doing. I thought the security problems were just incompetence, not espionage. You knew enough, I said. You buried that security assessment. You let your lawyers fabricate my personnel file. You tried to pay me to stay quiet. I was trying to save the company. 300 employees. You were trying to save yourself. I got in my car and drove away. I had won, in a sense. Brandon would go to prison. My name would be cleared. But I was still unemployed, still broke, still engaged to nobody. The victory felt hollow and incomplete. Then, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a Washington area code. Miss Walker? This is Sarah Chen from the Department of Justice. We'd like to discuss your potential participation in an ongoing investigation. Would you have time to meet tomorrow? I closed my eyes. It wasn't over. Not even close. The meeting with the Department of Justice happened at 8 in the morning on a Tuesday in a conference room at their headquarters building. Sarah Chen turned out to be a senior prosecutor specializing in government fraud cases. She was accompanied by an FBI agent named David Rodriguez and a forensic accountant whose name I didn't catch. Sarah got straight to the point. Miss Walker, we've been investigating Sentinel Defense Solutions for several months on suspicions of contract fraud unrelated to Brandon Whitmore's espionage charges. Your testimony yesterday opened up a new avenue we need to explore. Sentinel filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 3 days ago. I hadn't known that. Bankruptcy? They claim they're insolvent due to loss of government contracts. Their filing lists liabilities of $400 million and assets of only $80 million. If that's accurate, all creditors, including the United States government, will receive maybe 20 cents on the dollar for what they're owed. Why are you telling me this? Because we don't think their financial disclosure is accurate. We believe Gerald Whitmore and several other executives have been systematically moving money out of the company in anticipation of collapse. The bankruptcy filing is fraud designed to protect their personal assets while leaving everyone else holding the bag. Sarah slid a folder across the table. We received these documents anonymously 2 days ago. We haven't been able to verify their authenticity yet, but they appear to be Sentinel's real financial records. The company has been transferring funds to offshore accounts for 3 months. Gerald Whitmore and the CFO have hidden approximately $230 million. I opened the folder and saw bank statements, wire transfer records, and corporate documents showing a web of shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Ireland, and Singapore. The pattern was sophisticated but clear once you knew what to look for. Sentinel had been deliberately draining assets while preparing to declare bankruptcy. Where did you get these? I asked. An anonymous source calling themselves Eagle 6. Sarah looked at me carefully. The same source that sent you evidence about Brandon Whitmore's espionage. Eagle 6 again. Whoever they were, they had access to everything. Corporate emails, financial records, legal documents. It had to be someone high up in Sentinel's organization or someone with deep access to their systems. What do you need from me? I asked. Sarah leaned forward. We need you to file a qui tam whistleblower lawsuit under the False Claims Act. You would be the relator, alleging that Sentinel defrauded the government. If the court finds merit, the DOJ will intervene and take over the prosecution. If we recover funds, you're entitled to between 15 and 30% of the total recovery as the whistleblower. How much money are we talking about? If we can prove they hid $230 million while claiming bankruptcy, and if we can recover it, you could receive between $30 and $60 million. Maybe more if we find additional fraud. I sat back in my chair, stunned. That was life-changing money. But Sarah's expression told me it wasn't that simple. What's the catch? Several catches. First, filing the lawsuit means putting yourself back in the crosshairs of Sentinel's legal team. They'll retaliate however they can. Second, these cases take years to resolve. You'll be in litigation for potentially 3 to 5 years. Third, you'll need to testify extensively and potentially face aggressive cross-examination. Fourth, Sentinel will try to paint you as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. And fifth, there's no guarantee we'll win or recover anything. I thought about my situation. I was unemployed, nearly broke, living in a studio apartment I could barely afford, with a destroyed reputation in my industry. I had nothing left to lose. I'll do it, I said. Sarah nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. But I need to warn you. This is going to get worse before it gets better. The moment you file, Sentinel will know. And they'll come after you with everything they have." She was right. I filed the whistleblower complaint 2 days later, representing myself pro se because I couldn't afford an attorney. The complaint was sealed under federal rules while the DOJ investigated, but somehow Sentinel found out within a week. Douglas Hunt called me, angrier than I had ever heard him. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he said. "You think you can accuse Mr. Whitmore of bankruptcy fraud and walk away? We're going to bury you. We're filing defamation suits, tortious interference claims, and breach of contract actions. We're seeking damages in excess of $10 million. You'll spend the rest of your life paying off judgments." I hung up on him, but the threats didn't stop there. 3 days later, someone vandalized my car. All 4 tires were slashed, and the word LIAR was keyed deep into the paint. I reported it to the police, but they said without evidence of who did it, there wasn't much they could do. I had to pay $800. I didn't have to replace the tires. Then the media found out. A defense industry journalist broke the story about Sentinel's bankruptcy fraud investigation and named me as the whistleblower. Suddenly my phone was ringing constantly with reporters asking for interviews. I didn't talk to any of them, but that didn't stop them from writing stories anyway. Other former Sentinel employees started reaching out. Some thanked me for exposing the corruption. Others accused me of destroying the company and costing them their jobs. I got emails, phone calls, and social media messages. Some were supportive, many were hostile. The worst came 2 weeks after I filed the lawsuit. I was walking to my car after grocery shopping when a man approached me in the parking lot. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses even though it was evening. "Cherry Walker?" I stopped, feeling immediately unsafe. "Yes?" "You should drop the lawsuit." He said it casually, like he was giving me directions. "For your own good." "Who are you?" "Someone who's trying to help you. You don't understand who you're dealing with. These people have connections. They can make your life very difficult." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you." The man reached into his pocket and I tensed, but he just pulled out a piece of paper. He handed it to me. It had my daily schedule written in detail. What time I left my apartment, where I bought coffee, what gym I went to, when I came home from my part-time job at a bookstore. "They know where you are at all times," he said quietly. "Think about whether this is worth it." He walked away before I could respond. I stood in the parking lot shaking, clutching my grocery bags and the piece of paper. That night, I reported the incident to the FBI. Special Agent Rodriguez arranged for protective surveillance. An unmarked car sat outside my apartment building for the next 3 weeks. But through all of it, I kept going. I provided documents to the DOJ. I answered their questions. I prepared for depositions. And slowly, the case began to build. Then, 2 months after I filed the complaint, I got an email from Marcus, my former colleague from Sentinel's engineering department. He asked if we could meet somewhere private. I suggested a coffee shop in Georgetown. Marcus showed up looking nervous. He waited until we were sitting in a back corner before speaking. "I need to tell you something. I'm Eagle 6. I stared at him. "You sent me all those files?" He nodded. "I've been documenting Sentinel's crimes for 2 years. Ever since my younger brother Daniel was deployed to Afghanistan with faulty communication equipment that Sentinel built. The encryption system had a backdoor vulnerability that Sentinel knew about but didn't disclose because fixing it would have cost money. Daniel's unit got ambushed because insurgents intercepted their communications. 3 soldiers died. Daniel survived, but he's permanently disabled." Marcus's voice was shaking. "I started looking into Sentinel after that. I found evidence of fraud, cost-cutting that compromised safety, bribery of procurement officials, everything. But I was too scared to come forward myself. I have a wife and 2 kids. I couldn't risk losing everything. So I just collected evidence and waited for someone brave enough to use it." "Why me?" "Because you actually care about doing things right. In 6 years of working there, I watched you turn down shortcuts, refuse to sign off on things that weren't compliant, push back against executives who wanted to cut corners. You were the only person in that company with real integrity. When they fired you, I knew they'd made a mistake. I knew you wouldn't let it go. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You gave me the ammunition to fight back." "No," Marcus said. "You gave yourself that. I just provided information. You're the one who had the courage to use it." The DOJ investigation moved quickly after that. With Marcus's cooperation and his 2 years of documented evidence, prosecutors had everything they needed. Within 3 months, the Department of Justice indicted Gerald Whitmore, Laura Brennan, the CFO, and 3 other executives on charges including bankruptcy fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The bankruptcy filing was dismissed. Sentinel's hidden assets were seized. Brandon Whitmore, already in federal custody for espionage, pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence of 15 years. Gerald faced up to 20 years in prison. The trial took 6 months. I testified for 3 days, facing brutal cross-examination from defense attorneys who tried to paint me as vindictive and unreliable. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, testimony from other employees, forensic accounting, everything pointed to systematic fraud. Gerald Whitmore was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Laura Brennan got 8 years. The other executives received sentences ranging from 3 to 6 years. The government recovered $420 million in hidden assets and fraudulent payments. Justice had been served. But for me personally, the battle had cost everything I had. 6 months after the verdict, I was sitting in my studio apartment going through mail when an envelope arrived from the Department of Justice. Inside was a check and a letter. The letter explained that under the False Claims Act whistleblower provisions, I was entitled to 18% of the total funds recovered by the government. The check was for $75 million before taxes. After federal and state taxes, I would keep approximately $42 million. I stared at the check for a long time, not quite believing it was real. Then I started crying. Not from happiness exactly, relief maybe, exhaustion. The realization that the 2-year nightmare was finally, truly over. The money changed my life practically, but it didn't erase what I had been through. I was wealthy beyond anything I had imagined, but I was also changed in fundamental ways. I had learned what it felt like to lose everything. I had learned who I could count on when things got hard. I had learned the difference between justice and revenge. The job offers started coming almost immediately once the trial ended. Every major defense contractor wanted to hire the woman who had taken down a corrupt company and exposed a spy. I had offers from 5 different companies and 3 government agencies. The salary numbers were absurd. One offer was for $400,000 a year plus bonuses to be their chief compliance officer. But I turned them all down. I bought a house in McLean, Virginia. Nothing ostentatious, just a comfortable 3-bedroom with a yard and good security. I spent 6 months in therapy working through everything that had happened. The betrayal, the fear, the isolation, the constant attacks on my character and safety. I also spent time thinking about what I really wanted to do with my life. The money meant I didn't have to work ever again if I didn't want to, but I wasn't ready to retire at 34 years old. I needed purpose, meaning, a reason to get up in the morning. That's when I decided to start the Marcus Foundation. I used $5 million to create a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping whistleblowers and wrongfully terminated employees. We hired lawyers to provide free legal representation. We created a fund to help people pay their bills while fighting corrupt employers. We built a network of support for people going through what I had gone through. I named it after Marcus because he had helped me when it mattered most, even though he was risking his own career and safety to do it. He cried when I told him. He had left Sentinel before the scandal fully broke and was working for an aerospace startup now. We met for coffee regularly, and he became one of my closest friends. 3 months after starting the foundation, I got a call from Colonel Patricia Reeves. She had been promoted to full bird colonel and was now working in the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. She wanted to meet for lunch. Over salads at a restaurant near the Pentagon, she made me an offer. The Department of Defense was creating a new position, an independent security compliance watchdog who would report directly to the Inspector General's office. The role would involve auditing defense contractors, investigating security violations, and serving as an advocate for employees who witnessed wrongdoing. The salary was modest compared to my private sector offers, $160,000 a year. But the work would be meaningful. I would have real authority to make changes and protect people. I accepted immediately. That was 8 months ago. Now I sit in an office at the Pentagon with a team of 12 people working under me. We're implementing new whistleblower protections for defense contractor employees. We're creating streamlined processes for reporting security concerns. We're making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others. Last week, we received our first major case. An engineer at a different defense company reported that executives were falsifying test data on missile systems to avoid costly fixes. Because of the systems we put in place, she was able to report anonymously and safely. We're investigating now, and she won't lose her job or face retaliation. The system is working. I think a lot about that day in Brandon's office when I handed over my badge. I remember the shame I felt, the humiliation, the certainty that my career was over and my life was ruined. I remember thinking I was powerless, but I wasn't powerless. None of us are, not really. The most important lesson I learned is this: you are not what other people say you are. You're not your job title or your salary or your office location. You're not the lies people tell about you or the reputation they try to destroy. You're defined by your choices, especially the ones you make when everything is taken away. I learned that integrity isn't about following rules when it's convenient. It's about standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything. It's about refusing to compromise your values even when everyone tells you to be practical. I learned that documentation matters. For 8 years at Sentinel, I had kept meticulous records, followed proper procedures, and done everything by the book. When they tried to frame me, the truth was on my side because I had never cut corners or played games. Your reputation is built in the quiet moments when no one is watching. It's proven in the loud moments when everyone is. I learned that speaking up is terrifying but necessary. I thought about staying silent. I thought about taking the bribes, signing the non-disclosure agreements, walking away quietly. It would have been easier. But silence enables corruption. One person standing up can topple an empire of lies, but only if they're willing to risk everything. Most importantly, I learned that you're stronger than you think you are. I survived betrayal, unemployment, a federal investigation, death threats, the loss of my relationship, homelessness, and a years-long legal battle. There were days I wanted to give up, days I thought I couldn't go on. But I did, and I came out the other side, not just surviving, but thriving. Brandon called me dead weight that day in his office. He thought I was expendable, disposable, irrelevant. But dead weight doesn't bring down corrupt empires. Dead weight doesn't change laws and create new systems. Dead weight doesn't inspire other people to stand up and speak out. I was never dead weight. I was dynamite waiting for a spark. Now I use my position to help other people find their own spark, to give them the support and resources to fight back against injustice, to show them they're not alone. If you're going through something similar, if you're facing retaliation or betrayal or corruption in your workplace, I want you to know this. Document everything, trust your instincts, and don't give up. The road might be long and painful, but justice is worth fighting for. You're worth fighting for. And to everyone watching this, I want to ask, have you ever faced a situation where standing up for what's right cost you something important? How did you find the courage to keep going? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else who's struggling right now. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about people who refuse to give up in the face of injustice. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they think. Together, we can build a world where integrity matters more than politics, and where whistleblowers are protected instead of punished. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that your voice matters, your choices matter, and you are never as powerless as someone wants you to believe. Stay strong, stay honest, and never stop fighting for what's right.